system setup, you should come to settings, which is this little wheel on the menu bar. And you have an option to click that you're planning to set up vendors. Customers typically happen when you add them for a sale, but if you wanted to create one here or edit, you can. Or your finance companies that you do business with, as well as employees. The first topic is on the employees. When you add an employee, obviously you can put as much information as you want to. It is critical that they have to have a hire date, they have to have a business title, and as soon as you give them a title, the default security that is set up is what would be assigned to that employee. If they have an email or you want them to have the functionality to send emails while in the system, then that email information should come up. You can generate a signature, add something to it. So going forward, anything that system can be viewed can be emailed. If do not have an email here and there is an email set up in the default, then globally that email will be used for all the email needs. Um, if the employee can be on commissions or salary or whatever type that would matter, and if they're on commission, let's say in this case percentages, you can even have percentages and a minimum commission that sometimes in sales they should be receiving. So that is where you enter the information. They must have a password. If they do not have a password, they cannot log in the system. They can be in the system for other purposes, like for salaries, hourlies, and things of that nature. But if a user, one of the employees, has to have an access to the system, it must have a password. Then at some point, if they get terminated, you can terminate the employee, and if you terminate them and then later on they come back, this button will change to rehire. For those who do have multi-location, sometimes you can say the employee must be assigned to one of those specific location. Otherwise, system would use the computer location to consider the activity of each person for that location. We can discuss that more if you have any questions on it. In some states, that if there's a salesperson, they have ID numbers that this ID number needs to be printing some places. And also, you can assign how long an employee should be away from terminal before you log him out of the system. This is good because some people don't have a habit to be by the terminal, and you don't want anyone else to use the terminal and do activity that the name of specific person that logged in to be assigned to it. So this is where you can say, in this example, 45 minutes away, log them out. The other thing, of course, here is that if there are leads that come through the dealer zone, you can basically say this person typically gets leads. Otherwise, no reason to say no, they do not get leads, that their employee, their role in the company is such that they do not have to be bothered by that. The if you have a website with ASN, does this person get a chance to modify that website? So that if you say yes, you change them to yes, or you have a new employee that is going to be doing that, you must give it about 24 hours for that sync up to control that website. If there are decisions that sometimes for those partners that we have interface with and the loan approvals come in, does this person get a chance to see those decisions? If it's just default no and should remain no, except those maybe F&Is and others that they need to know it. In some cases, we have a collection screen for collection, and the name of the person that can be assigned to an account is if has a title of collector. So if you either do not do financing or you don't have collection role, always is a no. The collector level, it gets really at the higher sophistication of having a lot of collectors with different levels. Typically, you can leave it as none unless the need comes in that we need to discuss. The business development rep, sometimes in addition to having the sales, if you have a BDR department that you want to have a lead to also have a person that is in charge of BDR or just does BDR to be assigned to that lead, this is when you say that person is as a BDR. Otherwise, again, you leave it at no. ASN on a fifth of each month releases billing. And if you want that particular staff you're adding to be notified that there's a new billing available, then the answer should be yes. So every day when they log in, they see it and they can take care of it whenever. But if they're not the type of people that they're going to be involved with any kind of form with billing, like sales, typical of staff, the answer should be no. Then they don't need to be seen. Maybe just the owner and the office manager and somebody in the accounting has to get to see it. So having this done right, it solves a lot of problem down the road. If somebody comes back and changes things here, then there is a change log, and you can see that. And if there is any issue with the or any documentations for the employee, it can be uploaded to doc management and be stored there. Uh, on vendors, and we're going to talk about that in a second, you will be able to go ahead and actually, if you have an Excel sheet that have a lot of imported lists with the proper information, you can import them. But I'm going to discuss it as soon as we get to the employee setup. And of course, if this employee was added by mistake and is duplicated, if we can always look at see if there is any payment history here. And if there is no payment history for that employee, we can always delete this employee and not worry about it. But if there is history, accounting history, you cannot do that. And new again, if you wanted to get and setting up a new one. So once something is created and saved, then the save key is dimmed because it's autosave. Whatever we change here, it'll automatically saves and logs. So that's one setup. The next setup is for us to set up our finance companies. Obviously, finance companies are the ones that you either take trades and you have liens with, or you actually do business with them and you finance your paperwork with, your sales documents with. So if I would just select a finance company from the list, as an example, let's say I just pick anybody, by the way, the default, every system comes in with a default of -1. This means when you sell cars, that's a placeholder until later on you decide who's financing it. Some cases, if you have cash deals and you want to call them cash, means no lien holder, then you can create things like this. Of course, here again, duplicate it. But if there are some finance companies that you want to be able to go ahead and have them all listed there, when you select a lien holder, such as let's say this, you can decide whether this is a normal lien holder or is it actually someone as a lender. You can look at both lists at one time, but the idea is that if you want to have a shorter list for the lenders you do business with in the sales screen, then you tag them as a lender. But sometimes a lender can also end up being a lien holder. So the other thing is that you can have a lot of different information for these lenders. Normal address, physical address, mailing address, insurance address, sometimes legal address for certain purposes. You can put them all there, whether they have cell phone, emails, that kind of stuff. And in addition to that, if that lender has a tax ID that you needed for some reason, or they have always a standard doc fees or discount or participation they give you, or they have a electronic code for paperwork titling and everything that you want it to be printed on some forms, this is where you enter them. And in some case, when it comes to, we call it -2, but it doesn't have to be that. That is your finance company, your finance paperwork. And the reason for that is we also mark these as a buy here, pay here, which means you're financing that, and therefore the system behaves differently when it comes to that kind of a stuff. So that's as far as finance companies goes. And again, the negative ID numbers means the system already has them in there. Anything other than that, you creating it. So in this case, let's say on the second cache that I had, I'm going to say I don't need this lender because it's a duplicate. So I can say delete it. But in this case, it says it's attached to a cell. It cannot be deleted. So cases like that, when you do this, again, this is a PID. PID is basically, for lack of better words, private ID number. But basically, if I were to go ahead and go look for the other cache that is 4, see if that's attached to anything. And if I try to delete it, that's not attached to anything. I can delete that one. So again, this is how you manage a node item down to 1. Um, the other setup that you do is, as we talked about, is just your normal vendors, companies that you do business with for all kinds of reasons. If you buy cars from them and or otherwise, when you enter the basic information, and then you say whether they want to act. Sometimes you that vendor does business with you, at some point you no longer do business with them. You can inactivate them, so at least you don't have to constantly look at it. The information that you enter here is just for purpose of letters, statements, and other things. Miscellaneous information is very critical because if you set up a vendor that is for reconditioning, let's say cars in the case of auto dealership, then we limit these accounts to be only accounts that typically adds the cost to the cost of the unit. So reconditioning means any expenses entered in the system has to have a stock number in order to be a cost to that. And so that's up to you to choose whichever you want. But if I say this is a auction, means that every time I can, first of all, that means I can select this company in the inventory side when I purchase cars from, and system can put it into the assets and create a liability for them. If I want a specific liability account, not just a standard one, I can assign something. Otherwise, system always by default picks 2110. But again, you can assign something else if you want to. The other thing is that if you were to sort of say, I want for payroll, that means this is something that payroll related, and I want to be able to expense it at the payroll. So these are critical for setup for that. Or if you have a credit card company that sometimes instead of paying a bill with a bank account checks or otherwise, you can pay it by the credit card. And later on, again, there's some more discussion about that. Repo means that if you're financing inside and you want it to be able to I mean, you finance in-house and you want it to be able to go ahead and have a repo company and we have something called collateral management, then the name of these companies that they come marked as a repo will end up on list. So the every single category here, part vendor for service shop, warranty company again, service shop related, sublet service shop related, GPS for them to show up under inventory, other areas for when a company is a GPS company, so we can put GPS numbers. Or if you want in sales to, a particular vendor to show up as a gap company or as a service contract company, unless they're tagged to these things, they do not appear on the list. And again, consignment private sale is occasionally we use it for taking cars on a consignment. So let's say if I pick service contract, the only accounts that I can add is normal service contract costs. But if you do not want to go ahead and put in that account, you prefer a different account, then you can go choose whatever you want. But a lot of times system guides you through the things that really should be, so it's best to select it. And again, if there's any question to know about, to come about discussing that with us. So if I save this because the first time it says, well, you have the name, you have to enter a name because I forgot to put the name. So I'm just going to basically for time being put ABC. And if I try to save as well, you didn't forgot to do an account number for this. So I go back to the default the system gave me and I now save it. Now that it's saved, again, I can add more information. And notice that there's a contact information showed up here. So just in case we want to go ahead and have more contact information than just one, we can have as many contact information we want to. And again, if there is a list of some contact that is inactive and all that, then we can always see them. Beyond that, the other ones is customers which typically come from sales. But for setup, this is the first part. And by the way, if we are adding vendors, we can say we want to add an import vendor. And as long as we have an Excel sheet that has name, address, phone numbers, and all this information and vendor type, because in our system, we need a vendor type and we need a default GL account. So if you import an Excel of some sort without that, then you have to go one by one, select them and add these default accounts and vendor types. But if you prepare the Excel sheets that you give based on the categories I just saw a few minutes ago went over, if those categories are added and the account number is selected, now that we import them, the setup at least to some degree is complete. So that's very critical. You choose a file, you make sure you map them column by column to whatever these are, and then you load that and basically import it. One more thing that it would be worthwhile discussing, that is that if you have a credit limit for these vendors, like for Service Shop, it can be added. or if there are a scheduling and certain expenses that we can discuss that one-to-one on Q&A sessions to explain it better. But also, if since the vendors are sensitive and we don't want the entire staff see it, and it's more of a very exclusive vendors that maybe the owners and just the office managers need to know it, we can say that hide that vendor from most people except those who have a security to be able to see them. And some of these, as far as the gap and again accounting and all that, there are specific features attached to these, and we need to discuss them later. And if this vendor is a flooring vendor, because you do actually use them for flooring business, then by saying yes, they will end up showing up again in somewhere in the system that we're looking for flooring companies. Or for that matter, in the service shop, if this vendor is related to service shop, like a warranty company or a service contract company that sometimes covers claims, we can have a unique accounts receivable. But sometimes people may have something for service shop that they call it a policy fee, they write it off. Then instead of making it receivable, we can say anytime I select that, actually write off that policy for me or that amount that from the repair order. So again, we can have additional discussion when it comes to that. Also keep in mind that if their vendors they're not corporations, we can basically say they need a 1099. If the legal name is different, we can put that in there. And the category of the 1099, when at the end of the year we're going to print it, which box needs to be marked and filled out. So all of this is something you can manage, of course, the tax ID or Social Security. The other thing that's very critical to know is this one, that what do we want? Some companies have a name, but the DBA or AKA, when they have a different name for that they want it to be paid as. So we can go ahead and actually have different names for the when we print checks to them to be, and there's security that we can lock this up. But so in the future, not anybody can just go ahead and change that name unless they have the security, because it's critical that checks being printed, and you want to make sure that there's accountability for that. So again, set up and spending a little time here and making sure that they're done right, it solves a lot of issues down the road when you're utilizing these finance companies, vendors, or employees.